What makes a awful teacher?
You want kids to want to go to school.
Real relationships and real friendships are very rare.
It's not a job, it's a calling.
But when you got to enter their lives, why is that so meaningful to you?
Jesus laid down his life for us.
Welcome back to the Disciple Standard podcast. My name is Aaron. I'm your host, and I'm a pastor here at Sunlight Community Church. We have got some awesome guests for you today. First and foremost, Mr. Multiply himself, Scott Vanderplug.
Okay.
Welcome back to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine.
Sorry, that one's gonna stick. I think
Mr. Multiply himself.
I like the term Mr. Multiply.
My word.
Wow.
I think it's something that you've been known for. At least it's the network name here.
That's true.
So that will at least stick for that reason. And we've got some new blood here. I'm going to name him the Dean of Deep Thoughts, Reverend Dr. Jary Reed.
Reverend Doctor.
Reverend Dr. Jary Reed. Jary, welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Thank you.
Quick story about Jary Reed. When we were at a pastor's retreat, and we did not know the star-studded cast we had in Jary Reed amongst us. We went to Scott. You guys can remind me of how this went, but I remember we were in a room listening to somebody. Who were we even listening to? We paid for sure.
I don't even remember what you're talking about.
Okay, we went to a pastor's retreat.
Al Barth.
Al Barth.
Oh,
that's
okay.
right.
When we were down in,
Yes, it was all of the pastors.
Wow, that's great.
Of Sunlight. We were listening to Al Barth talk, and then we were going around introducing ourselves. And he finally gets to Jary Reed, and Jary Reed stands up and he says very kindly and humbly, Jary Reed, and he's like, "Wait, are you Jary Reed?" And he's like, "Yeah, that's the one I taught your kids." And he's like, "Where'd you go? We've been wondering. We miss you." All that kind of stuff.
The myth, the legend.
And ever since then, now we know who the presence that we're in. So, Jary, how'd you come to find Sunlight?
I think Sunlight found me.
Okay. Hold on. This Siri just kind of shooting up.
I knew it was a time for a change in life.
Okay.
And I was talking to my brother, and he said, friend of mine, Greg Howenstein, who happened to be going to church here, and I'd worked with Greg for about 20 years, said, Greg's got a plan for your life.
Okay.
So I called Greg. I said, you have a plan for my life? He said, come and have breakfast up in Port St. Lucie. And so I did, and guess who was there? And we just talked generally. We didn't even talk specifics. And as I walked out to the car with Greg after breakfast, he said, you've got a job if you want it.
Okay.
And that's it.
Wow.
Still trying to figure out what the job is. I have one if I want it.
Yeah.
And I wanted it. So it's been about 1.5 years now, going on 2 years.
What was your first impressions of Scott?
Of Scott?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, is that fair? The thing I appreciated, we just talked ideas. He's intuitive, so it was a fun meal. I mean, if he had said we're not interested, that wouldn't have surprised me either. Life goes on, but it was a fun conversation.
What was the big idea like that got you interested?
Oh, we were just talking church stuff.
Okay.
And so the church can be the world's most boring place, or it can actually be the greatest place.
Yeah.
And listening to him, how do you say it? I'm not the greatest fan of church. I'm the greatest fan of the church.
Okay.
And this was the church. So.
All right. Very good. So what kind of ideas did you share? Like I'm
I can't
You have
remember.
any idea? Yeah.
There's lots of stuff going around here. I'm just curious
Either
what
crispy or soggy bacon, I think.
Okay. And what was your first impressions of Jary? P.S.
Oh, I never thought about that.
I don't know if I ever thought about it either.
Why would you?
I don't know. There's lots of things I appreciate about Jary. I think I'm going to say some things. Maybe this will be a little controversial. We'll see what Jary thinks. But I just notice that I'll call it like a job hazard of being in ministry that I understand well enough. If you're in ministry, there's a lot of different things that you might do in any given day. So maybe I'll receive a phone call that somebody's in the hospital. I'll go visit him in the hospital. But then later that afternoon, I yeah, I'm meeting with a couple, they're getting married, they're all excited about it. Then maybe right after that, there'll be somebody who's having one kind of problem or another. And then after that, there'll be, yeah, somebody who's just super happy about whatever. Okay. And, as a pastor, you want to be with people where they're at. Like if people are mourning or they're going through grief, you want to be present for that. If people are excited and joyful, you want to be present for that. But it's very difficult in your life to have seesaw of emotions all in one day. And so what ends up happening, I think, is, or I'll just say this, there's some Sunday mornings where you got to get up and preach, but you don't really feel like doing that. So you kind of, the better part of being a professional is that okay, I don't feel like it, but that doesn't matter. Just do it.
Mm-hmm.
But what can happen to people, I've just noticed is that they forget who they are and they just become like a professional pastor or a professional whatever. And as a result, it's very difficult to get to know that person. They stop being like a real person. They just become like a persona. And I just noticed about Jary that he was a real person, and I appreciated that. He hadn't become a persona, the Jary persona, if I can put it in that way.
Pastor Jary.
That's meaningful to me because I think, I don't know. I really don't know about other people. But this is my thought process, which is if you're in ministry and you just become a professional, you might sort of even forget who you are. And maybe one of the main reasons you forget that is because you sell something to yourself that's not true. And I think people who wind up staying real people that have a deep connection to God and a real faith in Jesus Christ that has caused them to be more honest, or I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, and I just noticed that about Jary too. I think he has like a real and, it's not pretentious. It's not put on. It's just a real faith in Jesus, and he's trusted him both in the good times and also in the really difficult times when it would have been really easy to just walk away.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is that fair? These are my impressions.
Probably a lot better view of me than I have. I have to go meet this Jary guy.
Who is this Jary you speak of?
This is Jary.
This guy sounds like a great guy.
A little weird, but I see.
What's your
But do
reaction
you
to
think
that?
that's true?
Yeah, what's your take?
Yeah. I think I clearly am not defined by whatever position. Yeah. I think that part. That's clearly been something I've done on purpose. Yeah. So
Is that learned? Is that systematic? Like you said,
I
did it
grew
on
up in a
purpose.
world, I think, where you sort of could be defined by that. So people would refer to themselves. I mean, you call me Reverend Doctor, but it's always like, who does it seriously? It's always just doctor, some sort of goofy. But I grew up in a world where you did take that seriously, and people would,
Could you describe
be
this world for
impressed.
me? Could you describe this world for me?
Yeah, if you were a pastor, you couldn't quite be real. I think something he said he learned in seminary is people don't get to see what you're really like. They can't know that you're a sinner, that you struggle. And I think if you ever hear me preach and you stay awake, you will be convinced that I'm the worst sinner in the room. That is the goal, so that everyone listening can relax. And so I think often as a pastor, you're trying to impress people with how good you are. I'm trying to impress them with how good I'm not.
Yeah.
So
Why is that important to you?
I think because the gospel is important. I'll tell you why. Because once you're up front and you're talking, people think you have it together a lot more than you do.
Yeah.
And so you've got to be careful because you might believe that press. And I think if anything you don't want to be is you don't want to be a liar, whether it's internally or externally. And so I maybe go overboard. Like I've had people come up to me after services and say, you make yourself sound worse than you are. And my response generally is, I am a lot worse than I am. I mean, then I'm aware.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. And part of it is because I grew up as a missionary kid where we had to go to people's homes. And so we had to be, I got in trouble for destroying somebody's cuckoo clock one time because I was a kid and I played with it. I guess you're not supposed to. So I got in trouble because you're a missionary kid. You gotta be a good kid.
Yeah.
I wasn't a bad kid. Those things were hanging. What are you supposed to do with them?
So you said it was deliberate, though. Like you said that you were intentional about this. How long have you been a pastor?
A real pastor. I got ordained in 1990.
Wow.
So
what is that? 26 years?
Yeah.
No,
that
36?
36 years. Think of that.
Wow.
Think how holy I've become.
You're pretty holy, huh?
Yeah.
So
I sinned in about 10 minutes.
Yeah. So you said that's deliberate, right? Like just this trying to get away from the whole, like that persona of what Jary could be. When did that start being deliberate, and what do you do for that other than like on stage?
I don't know about always been deliberate. I'm aware of it. I think when I left the church 2004, was asked kindly to leave.
Okay.
Started working with high school kids again, thinking I have no idea how I'm going to relate to kids. I think maybe at that point I became very aware that these are kids. It was a Christian school with a lot of non-Christian kids, and the last thing they needed was a Bible teacher who pretended like he was a Bible teacher.
Okay.
And so at that point, I think I became aware that they need to hear very specifically that we can talk, and there's nothing you're going to say that's going to surprise me.
So you felt a real big need to not just teach the Bible, but teach like the meaning behind the Bible, like the gospel behind it.
Yeah, it was all. If you're going to have real conversation, they've got to understand that you're. Because I'd always say I'm the worst sinner in this room.
Sure.
Part of it's just by virtue of my age, part by some of the choices I've made that you guys might make. You just haven't had the time yet, or the opportunity. And so once you've done that, then the kids would be free to talk.
There's a few things I want to ask you about here, and maybe some of it.
You want to
Scott
know
can
my
chime in.
specific sin?
Well, no, not really.
Good.
I think
It's your first time on a podcast.
first
We don't
time
have
on a
that
podcast.
This is kind of like the initiation we do with everyone.
Right.
The first
Tell
time on a
us-
podcast.
tell us your worst
Tell us
sin.
the worst things we've done.
What is the deepest, darkest secret?
Really the most salacious
Let's
details.
start when I was 7.
Let's put it online too. Okay.
So far we've heard about the clock, but what's really going on with it?
Yeah.
What is the clock? All right. All right. So there's a few things I want to talk about, and you tell me if I have to cut it out, but I really want to know. I don't want to do it for this, but if we have to cut it out, we'll cut it out. I want to know, because I never heard these. I didn't know you were asked kindly to leave ministry in 04, or was that 04?
Probably 06.
Okay, 06. And I didn't know that, like I guess that would make sense on why you have strong views on like the role of a Bible teacher in the school, and like tell me how that came to be and what is that? So like and then maybe Scott on your idea of like what a Bible teacher should be in our school. But
He can give you the positive. I can give you the negative.
Sure,
I'll be
sure.
the bad example. He can
so
give you-
yeah, so I
Good
think those
cop,
two
bad
are
cop.
those
I'll be
two
the
are
bad
obviously
cop.
linked. So yeah, I'm curious.
May 1st, 2006, I moved out of my house, and the divorce was imminent. I let the church know. I was at a church in Miami, and at first they were pretty supportive, and then, and I'm not throwing rocks at them. This is not a criticism. This was God's gift, goofy gift, but it was a gift. They let me know I no longer had a job.
Okay.
So my kids were going to the school where I taught.
And they were kind about it.
Yeah, they were all right.
Okay.
And I had gone to, in my 12 years of high school, or from kindergarten through high school, I think I'd gone to 9 different schools. So I'd switch schools pretty regularly, and I thought my kids are in a school, they need to stay. So I lost my pastor's discount, and so I went over to the school thinking, I don't know how I'm going to afford this. School was pretty expensive, but I put on credit card their next year's down payment. So I didn't have a job anymore, and I did have credit card, and I thought, boy, I'm in trouble here, but I don't know what else to do. So as I went into the office, paid this bill, so my kids at least had a slot for next year. And the principal came up and he said, "How would you like to teach here?" I had no other option. It was not anything, not like a career choice. I keep finding kids somehow, and it's never been a career choice. And I was there 16 years. It was really God's gift to me. I didn't think so. I wouldn't have chosen it, but I think it's only as you learn to communicate to kids that you can learn to communicate to adults. It's only when kids ask you real questions, like, you say something theological and they look at you and they say, I had one kid said, "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard." And a girl one day, Letty, we called her Letty Capoletti. She said, "This is the stupidest class I've ever been in."
Yeah.
It was apologetics. And I said, "Letty, that's exactly how you should feel." Yeah. She had made it clear she wasn't a Christian. She didn't like this stuff. And I would make fun of them. And I'd say, "You guys pay money to go to a Bible class. That's ridiculous. I get paid. At least I'm getting something out of this. You guys are the suckers." And so she voiced that.
What an apologetic. Sucker.
Sucker.
You have to pay me to listen to this.
Yeah, it's crazy. So
You didn't believe it.
I said, "Someday, Letty, when this makes sense to you, we'll talk again." She and I were good friends. It wasn't like she was mad at me. She just, and I said, "That's the response you should have. If you're not a Christian, you should hear Christianity." And it just bothered you. And it bothered her. And I thought, that's great that it bothers her.
Yeah.
Then I had another kid who said, I'm so tired of you guys shoving this down our throats." And I thought that's a worthy response. So I tried not to ever do that, but we did talk about it. We would talk about, my job was to get them ready for college. These are mostly seniors. And so I'd play devil's advocate, and we would actually look at some of the things they did in world religions classes at different schools against Christianity. And we'd say, "All right, let's look at these things." So that when you go to these schools next year and you have this professor, after you punch him or her and say you're ridiculous, and they bring this up in class, you say, "Well, I've got a better reason why Christianity isn't true." So we'd look at all the reasons why it might not be true, and then say, "Look, those are silly." It's proven the test of time.
Yeah.
So
In your opinion, and maybe PS's as well, what would make a great Bible teacher, and maybe what would make a great teacher in our schools? Right, we have a middle school, we have a high school, and we have an elementary school. Maybe there's different things, but like universally, obviously, I think you were there for 16 years. They liked you. They deemed you enough that they, this is a great teacher for 16 years. I'm not sure.
This is an adequate teacher.
Yeah.
Let's get it right.
And so, okay, so I think you were actually teacher of the year last year or 2 years ago. I forget when.
Maybe.
I'm sure you were, right? P.S. Proof text me here. This is true, right? I don't want to.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay, I think it. Yes. Okay, great.
Yes.
Maybe Jerry has won some awards.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe.
Maybe.
We should flash these awards on the screen or something. I don't
How
know.
would you even know this?
Well, I hear things, right?
Like, I clearly wouldn't tell you this.
I hear things. And I don't remember if I hear them right. I have bad hearing.
Probably heard it wrong.
Well, at least I know this. 16 years in a school, you don't get rid of people that you like. And so people like you up to a point, and then 16
They
years
like
later,
you up to a point.
16 years later,
Story
you're
of my
leaving.
life.
Yeah. So what are some things if you were looking for a teacher to hire or replace yourself, or PS, what are you looking for in our teachers? If I had every teacher listen to this segment of the podcast, like what is it we're looking for teachers, and why? Like,
All right.
what are they looking for?
Well, we've been talking about this.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Because a school is only as good as the teachers.
Of course.
You can have great curriculum. The teachers determine the culture. You want kids to want to go to school. You want them to hang out with you. So you got to like kids. You got to get there in the morning, and even if you're having a bad day, it's not about you, it's about them. So you got to be able to turn off that stuff. So as I was going through the divorce stuff, and the world was just like, yeah, I just thought I can't even, I don't have the energy to move. I can't pay any bills. I don't know what to do. I was just destroyed. As I was, going through denominational stuff, and people were haranguing me because real Christians don't get divorced. And then you go to school, and it's got to be about them. So you got to be able to focus in on kids. And I think you've got to choose your battles carefully. Like kids just say the most outlandish things. Well, they're allowed to.
They do.
And you got to decide what are the things I'm going to confront and what are the things I'm not. I think you've got to realize that kids are distracted. Their lives are busy and their homes are a mess. And they too are sinners. And so you can't get offended if they fall asleep in class. You know what? They're tired. We would always eat in class. You're allowed to eat and drink. And kids had a policy. Now that I don't work there, I can say this. If you need to get up and go, just go. I had one young lady, Danny Amador, and she'd periodically say, Mr. Reed, I need to go walk. Go walk. And I said, Dan, what are you going to learn in here? You've already checked out.
How old are these kids?
Seniors in high school.
Okay.
They're going to college next
so
year.
they're almost adults.
Yeah, they're adults.
Yeah,
they got to get ready for college. So, if you needed to take a break, you just say, hey, I'll be back. Okay, just be back. And we had a teacher, Ed Wooten, Ed's a wonderful man, but he generally didn't know the names of his kids in class. So if you went out in the hallway and a teacher or one of the administrators said, what class are you from? You always had to say, I'm from Ed Wooten's class. So never out me. It's Wooten, because he'd have no idea where they were from.
That's funny.
I told the principal that, so he knew that I wasn't outing him. So you got to like kids. I think you got to laugh a lot. You gotta just think, this is fun. If you're not having fun with them, you need another job. You've actually got to, if you're a Bible teacher, you've actually got to believe this stuff. Questions can't scare you. You've got to be willing to say, I have no idea. I've never thought of that. That's a great question. I think you've got to enter their lives. You can edit all this and be willing to hurt with them, pray with them. I've done some funerals. You've got to enter into the lives of families. So it's not a job, it's a calling. And you've got to say, these kids and what they're going through is going to dominate my life. Doesn't mean you don't have a life outside, but these are your disciples, and you've got to hang with them. Sorry about all that.
I have here, you got to like kids, you got to laugh, have fun. If you're teaching Bible, you got to believe. These questions shouldn't scare you. But when you got to enter their lives, why is that so meaningful to you?
Because the stuff I knew about the kids that I was teaching at times was just heartbreaking. And that a kid would tell a guy my age their doubts, their fears, that they'd invite me, to do their weddings. That's like the greatest privilege in the world.
Yeah.
So it's like I do, every year I'll do a few weddings. So this year I've done some in different countries, done some here. And all of a sudden you realize the relationships that you've built with these kids.
Yeah.
And and they're excited to show, meet my wife, meet my husband, here are my kids, here's where I'm living. Can you come up and visit? And you think, okay, this is unlike anything else you do. So.
Yeah, I can relate to a degree. I've done a couple weddings for people who were in my youth group, been in the weddings. Actually, Jake, we've been friends, youth, whatever. And then I've done a couple funerals, actually. I've done a funeral for a leader, and I was at a funeral of someone who was in youth group with me. Yeah. And to see like the different, I don't know, highs and lows or poles of life is very difficult when you've got a whole bunch of in between, and like the fears and even the goals in their lives. Like there's the aspirations. It's a lot. But it struck me when you said they're your disciples. I've never thought about it like that. We're in the middle of hiring and for new contracts for teachers. So we're bringing people in and we're seeing who they are, and it shifts my perspective a little bit. Like, okay, who do I trust with these kids? Like, as your disciple,
who's going to spend more time with them?
Yeah, right.
The kids used to tell me, you spend more time with me than my parents do. I do. because I'd go to all their games. I'd announce the games. So I'd go hang out at football, basketball, lacrosse, volleyball. Whenever there was a trip, guess who got to go? And so, you're in Chicago with the seniors, and I'd always be in the back, sort of back row, back everything. I'd say, and kids would just drop back, and we could just walk and talk.
Do you see this trend growing as
What trend?
like more teachers are becoming more like of a parent figure in these kids' lives and their parents?
Yes.
Like the parents are leaving or split for numerous reasons, right? Working more, I don't know.
Well, I think parents double income, so people are working.
Sure.
A lot of activities, so people don't get a lot of time together as families. The amount of people that eat dinner together. When I was a kid, it was 5 o'clock. Make sure your shirt is on and be at the table. And Dad's going to pray at 5 o'clock. Be there. There's very few kids that do that. In Miami setting, it was they would eat dinner much later, 9, 10, or 11. Kids were doing sports. They were doing dance. They were doing this and this and this. So there's not. Certainly, parents would have the biggest influence, but often it wasn't direct. It was indirect.
Okay.
And we had the chance to have a direct influence.
Well, it shows the importance of the teacher.
Yeah.
And you said a couple things. The teacher creates the culture at the school, and the teacher has these disciples. P.S. I'd like to get your reaction to some of that, and some of your thoughts on how you think.
I disagree totally. Go ahead.
I guess this is what I think, which is, I think there's kind of like two great powers. One is the power of the gospel and scripture itself. And I really believe that God's word is powerful. And so I think, an effective Bible teacher, first of all, will understand that the Bible is centered on Christ and the message of the gospel. And I think probably, I think this about Christianity in general, but I'm sure it's true in Christian schools also, which is people have twisted the message of Scripture, and it's a whole bunch of here's what you ought to do and here's how you ought to live, and it's kind of like a moralistic deism where there is a God and you better be good, which is the exact opposite message of the Bible. So I just think the best Bible teachers will really tap into the inherent power of the gospel, which is the central message of Christianity. And I suppose in order to do that, then, if you really want to teach the gospel, you have to admit yourself that you're in need of it. I'm a sinner who is in desperate need of Jesus Christ. I need salvation. So it's not, God doesn't accept me because I've earned his favor. He accepts me because of what Jesus has done. And I just believe that message is so powerful. I probably can't say enough about it. But then I think there's a second real power. And it's obvious to me as I read scripture that, God intends it or knows it. I mean, he's the creator, so how could he not? But it's a power of real friendships and relationships. Another way to put it is the power of love and care, that you would take your time and who you are and you would become invested in somebody else. You put them first rather than yourself. I think I just heard Jary talking about that. He has stuff going on in his life. He can't pay his bills. He's got, whatever is in his mind and heart, but he's like, okay, but I'm here for them. And kind of you before me mentality, which is, I think, the heart of the gospel. Jesus laid down his life for us. Anyway, probably a lot more we could say about it, but I think in our society today, real relationships and real friendships are very rare. And I just think that what Jary was talking about was he was teaching the Bible. He was definitely doing that. He was teaching the gospel, but what he was really doing is he's caring about these kids and People are like, wow, you're closer to me than family members. Well, there it is. The power of friendships. And years later, they can't think of anyone else better to do their wedding, to be the officiant at the wedding than their high school teacher. Well, that's not common. The reason is friendships, relationships. And anyway, those are my thoughts.
Let me add, everything you do as you teach is gospel. Every class is an excuse to talk about the gospel. I think you're exactly right that the goal is not to get them to be good children, because they're not. The goal is for them to understand their need for Jesus, and that there's nothing they can have done. There's nothing, they can't get too far away. The gospel's always right there. And so and by relating to these guys, I think the gospel becomes real when you're trying to live it out. And part of that means then they need to see your brokenness. Like, I've had kids before come in and say, I had one girl come in one day and she said, we were at a student event. She said, you weren't very comfortable yesterday, were you? And I said, no, I wasn't. How would you know? She said, because I'm more of an introvert. I'll sit in the corner given the option. She said, well, you were directing conversation, and you only do that when you really don't want to talk, and that's your way of protecting yourself. And I thought I said, you are so observant. And so they get to see, they got to know me enough that they would know, even in my weakness, what I would do.
Get out of my brain.
Yeah, no, it was wonderful. I had another kid come in one day, and I was leaning against the wall, and he sat down next to me. Danny was his name. And Danny said, Mr. Reed, what's the vibe? It's not very good today. I said, how would you even know that? I said, I've been pretending really well. He said, nah, you're not pretending well at all. I thought, that's so good.
Yeah.
So it is the gospel, though. We want to point them to Jesus.
Yeah.
Because when they leave a Christian school, man, they're hearing it. They don't need to hear about religion. They need Jesus.
I got a couple questions here.
There we go.
But first, let me say, one time, kids are so honest. One time I was preaching, actually right here on the stage, and a kid was sitting in the front row, just right here, and I was preaching, and he was doing this to me. Like this, just like that, for like 5 minutes. Oh, and I couldn't shake it. I was like,
that last time Scott preached.
yeah, I was like, were you telling me to stop, kid? You get out of here. Apparently it's because I was talking about, like, I think love, or sin and love and all that kind of stuff, and lust. And I guess he was getting in trouble with his girlfriend at the time. So he was like, Aaron, stop talking.
God,
and I was
hilarious.
like,
That's good.
I don't know what to do with this child. I have no idea. But in the spirit of honesty, they're telling you, you're not doing well today. They can see right through you, especially if you get to know them for some amount of time. Just curious, like, how do you balance sharing the gospel, keeping a relationship with them, and then teaching to the standards or the curriculum, or getting them to get a good grade, right? Like, I'm not a teacher in a classroom, haven't never been one, but is that hard? Is that easy? I would assume that's a question that some other teachers might have.
Bible class. Who cares about their grade? Say, guys, you deserve.
Hot take.
You get an A in here if you just do your work. I had a kid get a 14 in class one time. A 14.
14%.
You got to work. Yeah, you got to work really hard to get a 14. He's the only kid in my years that had to take the class over. Like, how in the world do you take my class over? So just do your work. And I used to give, like, actual tests when I started. Kids would cheat. And I thought, this is ridiculous. They're cheating in Bible class. I caught a kid. There was one girl in the first year, and I had her put her hand on the Bible. Did you cheat? And she said, no. And my response was, liar. And that became her nickname. For the rest of her, she's a freshman, so for the rest of high school.
What?
Yeah, well, we were good friends.
Liar.
So her nickname, it didn't become liar, like you're a liar. It became liar. So I saw her years later. She came to a homecoming game, and I'd forgotten what her name was. And she was walking across the football field, and I just yelled, liar. And she turned around and waved and went, yeah. It became a term of endearment, liar.
I'm going to, your relationship with that.
Yeah. So then I changed the way I graded. It was more essays, and I said I'm not so concerned. I'm not concerned about your grammar. I'm not an English teacher. I'm concerned with what you write, and here's when you're going to fail. I want to know what you think. You say whatever you want. You're not going to offend me, and no one's going to see this but me. But what you can't do is if your words, your syntax, your grammar sounds like anybody else, you get a 0. That just means you're lazy. And that happens some. So kids, if they would answer the questions, because we'd ask all sorts of questions, because the quiet kids won't talk. So I'd have them write stuff. In class, we'd often write stuff, but you didn't have to put your name on it. And then for tests, you would put your name on it, but I'd only see it. It'd be more essay. So the good news was I got essays. The bad news is I had a lot of essays to read. I had them write, at their senior sort of final thing, they had to write an 8-page paper on what they believed. Who is God, Jesus, Holy Spirit, church, obedience, salvation, heaven. You write whatever you want. This is your worldview, not mine. Mm-hmm. So the grades would, and the administration understood that, and I would ask them periodically, "You sure we're good with this?"
I was about to ask, yeah.
Like, no. I would always clear it. This is what we're doing. They said, "Nope, this is great," because I think they understood the value of conversation. Mm-hmm. I used to have kids would skip other classes and come into mine, and I had no idea. I didn't know who was in there because there'd be all these kids, and every once in a while the teacher would come in and give me that look. Is so and so in here? And they said. And they go, yeah, I'm right
They're
here.
hiding in Bible class.
Yeah, exactly right. They're using me.
Yeah.
So
did everyone get an A in your class? Like
A's and B's, generally A's. If you do your work, why wouldn't you get an A?
Okay, I don't know.
Guys, this is the athletes. This is going to raise your GPA so you can continue to play baseball.
So everyone got to Bible and got an A, walked out with an A.
Well, yeah, because Bible, the rules change. This was an excuse for conversation. Mm. And if it becomes oppressive academically, then you've lost the freedom. They need the freedom to talk. They need the freedom to doubt and write what they want, and it doesn't need to be the right Christian answer.
So it seems like for the teacher to really do that, the administration needs to be on the same page with them.
And they were very much for it.
This was your view, but P.S. Do you share this? Do you see some adjustments here? Especially for our school, because that's still kind of crazy, right?
That was only this one class. Different classes I taught. That was Christian living, apologetics. They'd get graded. Life of Christ. So the underclassmen didn't get that privilege. It was this senior class.
Okay, so that's a good.
There you go. The underclassmen had regular tests, but they were still what your opinion is. But I would grade them, so they would get. I remember one girl got a 70 on a test, and. I thought you were my friend. Why'd I get a 70? I said, well, you got a 70 because I like you. You really deserved a 55. So they did get graded.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Gotcha.
But that class, the rules were completely different.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I'm glad to make that clear. Yes.
What's your take on your reaction on that?
I don't really have a take. I guess.
Would you like?
I'll go back to what Jary said, which was, these are my disciples. And, I've been into discipleship quite a little bit.
A little bit.
I don't think I've ever thought of assigning a grade to anyone. As I was trying to disciple anyone, it seems like that would probably go against the grain of what I was trying to do.
Did you say Jay got a C minus?
Oh, interesting.
Longest disciple. He had to repeat the course.
So yeah, I don't know. I don't think I have too much more of a comment beyond that. I think Jary was trying to accomplish something.
Yeah.
And he was clear-minded about it, using grades where necessary, and
sure.
There you go.
He knew what he was doing.
Doing what he was doing.
Well, I'm curious. Okay, so let's say this makes it to Eddie, which is we trained him to preach. He's our current Bible teacher. Hopefully for a very, very long time, if he wants it. There's other teachers here, middle school. We're going to be hiring for high school. We got elementary school. Just curious on how are you guys thinking through, and Scott, Jary, on what makes a great teacher versus maybe we could even do this like a mind exercise. What makes a awful teacher? And then we just reverse engineer that.
You're the dude and you're the dictator. Don't you get to go? You get to go first.
Yeah, I don't know. I think actually there's probably a lot of things that go into being a great teacher. Maybe hard to just engineer it because everybody's different. Like people have different personalities, they have different skill sets, they might approach the classroom differently. I think actually we said already that you're there for the kids. I think if you're there for yourself, like what can I get out of this job? What's in it for me? That's probably a negative sign. I think people generally don't go into teaching because they think, what can I get out of it?
Right.
So when you find people who are more concerned for themselves than for actually like the kids that they're teaching, that's probably a bad sign. I think then, teachers develop skills probably over the course of their career, like anyone who has a career. They'll know the subject matter that they're trying to teach. I mean, it's different, right? You're teaching Bible, you're teaching biology, you're teaching
Math,
calculus.
Yeah.
There's different skills that you have to acquire. And I think maybe the best math teachers, first of all, it's not just the information, if I can put it that way. Like information, you can get it anywhere. So it probably still has to do with friendships, relationships, that kind of thing that I was talking about before. But then, that you're able to help someone understand. You're able to, like I'm thinking about the math, you're able to get them to some level of achievement, like an aha moment, like, I'm not understanding this at all. Okay, let's walk it back. So the teacher strives to understand what the student understands so that they can help them understand whatever they're trying to teach. So there are clearly people who are better at teaching than others, I don't know. I don't know if I comment beyond that because it's like a very general question. So to get really specific answers would be difficult.
Yeah. I think you outlined it in the first part, saying how if they're here for themselves, it's a bad sign. I like how you said it, it's a bad sign, right? And if you're here for others, that's a good sign. And then just like the mastery of skills, right?
Which is probably true in every profession.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I guess that's true. And then the willing to learn and we stumble towards excellences and grow every day. How about you, Jerry?
When it comes to Bible, I think when they're younger, they've got to learn the content. Like we are, maybe not a fair statement, but I think we are more biblically illiterate. Like I grew up in a world where we had our sword drills. And the sword drills, you just sit and you'd have your Bible and, name the books of the Bible. And I could do it in one breath.
Okay.
So it's like learning the math table.
At what age could you do that?
I don't know. We did it all the time.
Okay.
Like learning the math tables. You learn the books of the Bible. You learn verses.
Yeah.
I've got all these verses in my head, and they're Mr. Hannum, and they're all King James version because that's what God wrote.
Right.
But I got them, and so I think you do that. And so you want a teacher who is organized, can make learning fun.
There you go.
Can do those little songs, whatever it takes to get kids to learn. You gotta get before they can start reasoning. They've got to have the information. So we've got to do a good job of teaching them, not just moral lessons. Be like David and fight the Goliaths in your life. Yeah, we've lost it. It's the details of the story.
Yeah.
And then when they're a little older and they've learned the content, I mean, you're teaching them using gospel, but now you can begin to show them how the gospel fits in all of Scripture. But if they don't know the content, if they've never watched the movie, it's hard to talk about.
Sure.
The themes of the movie.
What you think about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
And then as they get older, I mean, following maybe a more classical education, you begin to let them say what they think, and you don't really correct them as much as you direct them.
Okay.
And then as they get older, then you do this again, and now they're a little bit more articulate. The goal is by the time they're heading off to college, they have figured out what they believe. And it doesn't have to jibe with what I believe. You hope they know Jesus. As we work through youth group, we're saying we want every one of our students to have been discipled, because you learn the parameters of Christianity. The gospel's clearly central in that. And then not only that, we want them to have discipled somebody else.
Okay.
And then another of our goals is they've gone on some sort of missions trip, so that they're taking it outside of themselves. So they've got to know their material, and then they've got to learn how to articulate poorly, and then maybe better, and then get calluses on the hands from using it.
We've talked a little bit about Bible illiteracy on this podcast in a couple of episodes. What's your take on it as far as our culture, kids, adults? How well versed are we on the Bible? If you were to grade us on a 1 to 100, or give us a grade, letter grade?
Yeah, who's the us?
I'm going to say us would be...
I thought maybe it's you and me, and I was waiting to see what Jerry's grade would be.
Mine would,
C's, get
yeah,
degrees.
mine would be a C, just barely passing. No, maybe us as a society. Let's say youth group, your youth group, and your youth group spans middle school and high school, public school, private school, homeschool. So just for everyone who's curious. So what's your take on Bible literacy in 2025?
I'm for it.
Yeah.
When I either do youth group, I'm teaching, or I teach chapel at the middle school, high school, rather than talk at, I'm trying to talk with. So a lot of questions. Kids know a lot. I'm impressed. But what we were doing Matthew 22, the feeding of the 5,000.
Okay.
And I asked, where was Jesus before this story? You know that? The answer? I'm putting you on the spot. I don't need to put you on the spot. He had been in Nazareth.
Okay.
And he heard, and that's where he said, that when you go to your hometown, prophets without honor. And then he heard that John the Baptist died. And boy, that's his dude. And so he went down to the Sea of Galilee, got in a boat, it looks like, crossed over to a solitary place, sort of that empty area, and the crowds followed him. So I said, where was he beforehand? Little girl, it was actually Brinley, raised her hand, Nazareth. I said, how in the world, how do you know that? I was so impressed.
I'm curious.
And so I would ask questions about this, and it was cool because not only would they give answers, they would also ask questions. So 5 loaves and 2 fish. So I said, what was the fish? And a couple kids said, I think they were raw. And I said, so this kid carried around raw fish all day?
They were Japanese sushi.
Yeah, well, that's it. And then one person said, I think they were dried. And then we talked about smoked fish. So
Actually, never thought about that.
yeah. So these kids, whatever we're doing at the school, they're learning the information.
Okay.
The kids that are at public school, they don't have that advantage, and so they know much less.
Bravo, Eddie. Is that what
No. Well, it's going all the way back to the elementary too.
Oh, okay, good.
But I think, yeah, exactly. Eddie's doing it.
Yeah.
And I think that, at that age, that's what they need to do. They need to go over these stories and ask these. You're good at asking questions about a text. That's what they need to be asked. Why would they say that? Why would they use this word? What are they doing? What do you think of the disciples thinking? You just got to permeate the text with questions, and then let them sort of mumble their answers, and then you get to direct them. If you know the answer, if you don't, you can say, I don't know the answer, but I will next class. And then collectively, you're learning the information.
Gotcha.
It's got to be a discovery.
I was gonna answer your question with who's Nazareth. So
who's Nazareth?
I never heard of that guy before.
Lead singer of the Galileans.
I do want I want to revisit a topic that we just skimmed over. I think is important, is the importance of a teacher or the collective teachers to the culture. How do they shape the culture, and how do we as a just as pastors help shape that culture with the teachers? I think it would start with hiring, right? I'd start there. It's something that I'm steeped in right now. But how else would you? What worked for you and your past school, and how did apparently the administration was very supportive. So what are the kind of stuff they did, and how is that culture created?
They gave me freedom to be me.
Okay.
I could dress like me. Only once I generally didn't wear T-shirts. Unless it was a school T-shirt. I'd wear a school T-shirt, khakis. I never wore jeans, but khakis. And only once did the head of school walk into my room. The school had given us Crocs. They gave us Crocs. So I was wearing the Crocs. And he walked into my room and he says, "I have something to talk about." And I thought, this is going to be interesting. So I was sitting on my table there, and he said, "You can't wear these Crocs." And I started laughing. I said, "That's it? That's your only concern?" He said, "Yes." I said, "I won't wear these Crocs." They've been given to me by the school.
Yeah.
So about a week later, he came up to me and said, "I thought you were mad at me." I thought, "Over Crocs?" No, I was thrilled. That's all it was about.
Yeah.
You know?
We should get out Crocs. Those are the
So they weren't concerned about dress code. I mean, there were limits, but that wasn't the issue. Even
You
with
have socks on? Is that part of the
I
problem?
probably didn't have socks on. I can't imagine having socks on.
That's
Crocs.
the problem.
People like that.
No socks with Crocs.
Oh, you can't wear socks. No,
So people were looking at your toes. He didn't like that.
Yeah, well, they liked my toes. My room, I didn't have. I had tables around the edge, so I didn't have desks. And the goal was any teacher that got rid of their rolling chair, we would adopt. So we probably had 15 or 16 beat up teachers' chairs in the middle. Cool. So kids would just sit in the middle. Kids would bring stuffed animals, big old, like I had a big old alligator that was like 5 feet long. I have no idea where it came from.
Yeah.
If kids needed a nap, guess where they were. So you sort of suspended the world. It was a unique situation. I'm not sure even if I was there now, I would be able to do that. I wouldn't do that. I don't do that here.
That's funny.
But in that situation, it seemed to be what worked.
I think I want to close out with this kind of question. Who's been the most impactful teacher in your life for both of you guys?
Oh.
And why? Can't say Jesus.
Who?
Boy, I don't know. When I was in high school, I had a math teacher, Mrs. Lund, who, for whatever reason, first of all, she was extremely organized and very good at teaching math. But then secondly, she took time to actually kind of get to know her kids. So I can remember when we were seniors in high school, we would like drive out to her house and just, I don't know, we want to be around Mrs. Lund. It's like a bunch of teenage boys like, oh, let's go out to Miss Lund's house. I don't know why, but she was probably a person who tried to build some relationships with the kids she was teaching. So I think about her. Then the other person I think about is when I was in college, I had a teacher who, he actually was a Bible teacher, and I took New Testament Greek from him. And a couple of things. One is he was an incredibly kind person. He had been a missionary in Nigeria and had translated the entire Bible into tribal language.
Wow.
That had been his life's work before he came to be a teacher at this college. He was extremely demanding, which I kind of appreciated. So I remember when we started New Testament Greek, there was like 35 people who signed up for the course. And he said, by the end of this course, there'll only be 4 of you left. And he's like, I've taught this enough. I realize you guys are here, but you're not going to cut it. I'm not going to slow down for you. So you have to keep up and you have to do your work. And one by one, you'll come to me and tell me that you're going to drop the class. And just know that I knew ahead of time. But there's 4 of you who I'm here for. So,
wow.
I don't know. I kind of appreciated that. Actually, the course ended with 5, so he was wrong.
He's a terrible teacher. No, just
no. But
good for him.
He realized that the majority of the people who were in the class kind of had this idea like, oh, wouldn't that be great if I learned this? But they weren't serious about it. And he really wanted to be there for those who would be serious about it. So I don't know whether that's a good or bad story. But when I think about who was an impactful teacher, it was certainly him, because he kind of raised the bar and demanded more, and that ended up being very helpful to me over the course of the long haul.
I have here, I picked out a couple traits here. You said extremely kind.
Oh yeah, he was extremely kind.
Built up relationships.
Yeah.
Someone willing to build up relationships, and raised the bar, called you to a higher standard.
Okay.
How about yourself, Jerry?
3 guys. College, a guy named Rev Sellers, little Bible college, and they offered Greek. And someone said it's the toughest class they offer. And I thought, well, if it's the toughest class, I'm taking it.
This is a recurring theme
wow.
between the two of you guys here.
I got it. So I
Tough
took it.
Greek class here.
And Rev and I became friends. He was like this old guy. I realize now he was like in his 50s. I mean, he makes me look ancient where I am now. But he's this old dude. But I worked it out eventually where I'm not sure how I did this. I got out of all my other theology classes. It was a dispensational college. At that point, I'd already started moving away from that. And I just took all language classes. And he had this we had an apartment complex that we lived in, and his offices were on that side. So in the mornings, I'd just go down to his office, would do our Greek stuff, and then would spend the afternoon playing ping pong. It's a great life. And so Rev just, he said I was okay. He never said I was okay, but he said I was okay. And so Rev, then I started working at a church as a sophomore, part of the beautification committee. My roommate and I, Stephen, we were the maintenance crew, and his name's Steve Brown, and Brown taught grace, and I had no idea. I thought it was a shtick. I thought, who is this guy? He can't be real, because he would say all this stuff. He just would say, like you guys sometimes say, I have no filter. Well, I learned it from Stephen, and he would just talk, and I thought, this has got to be a game. I was 19 years old, but it wasn't a game. And early one morning, we'd done a sleepover at the church, and he came out to me and he said, he's got this really deep voice, young man, God's called you to be a minister. And so Brown, he's in his 80s now. He's walked with me since I was 19. Huge role. The third would be Wilf Bellamy. Wilf was British, and he was very severe. He wouldn't smile. And I thought, what's wrong? Always wear a suit to church. I thought, what's wrong with this guy? And I took a group of kids. We were supposed to go to Africa, but we couldn't because of some guys had gotten killed, so the State Department wouldn't let us. I had a group of kids ready to go on a mission trip, so we just pivoted and we went to Barcelona. I didn't ask permission of anybody. We just went. And when we got back, he was the head of the missions department, and he wanted to meet with us. And I thought, oh gosh, here comes a day of reckoning. This mean British dude is just going to have me for lunch and then have tea and crimpets. And so I went and met with him. He was the most gracious man. And he died 10 years ago at age 80. So he's 30 years older than I am. The most gracious man in the world. Still scared me at times. But when I did a church plant, we did a church plant. He came, Key Biscayne was going to support it, and then they couldn't. So we were on our own. We did it anyway, and he came along and said, I'm going to be the elder from Key Biscayne. Man, he just took me under his wing. So I've had these different men who have taught me how to think, and at the same time said, you have value, I guess, and you can do this. Like when I was the pastor of the church, Wilf had been a pastor for years, and I thought, why am I the pastor? Why isn't he the pastor? And I confessed that to him years later. We went to Fort Myers one weekend to his place. They had a home in Miami, a home in Fort Myers, and all weekend I kept expecting him to say, son, let's talk. And he was just going to have me for lunch about what a horrible pastor I was. It never happened. And I thought, what's wrong? I'm waiting for this yelling. I told him that years later. He said, why? You were doing a great job. Well, I didn't think so, but he was the man who came alongside of me and said, you're okay. So
you said over ping pong, the first one.
Lefty.
So starting relationships with you and saying you were okay.
Yep.
Steve Brown talking about grace repeatedly. And then this gentleman right here, the British guy,
Wilf.
So you said he was gracious to you. What does that look like? Could you describe, if someone doesn't really understand, what does it look like to be gracious? What is that like as a teacher to a student?
He didn't put up with any silliness. Like he didn't do small talk. That's why I think he scared me, because he'd look at you and you'd feel like he could look through. He was probably the most complete thinker I've ever met. And yet what he would do is we'd go out to lunch quite a bit. I'd spend time at their house, he and Nancy, his wife. And he would bring up topics. And I'm like, oh, no, not another topic. And then he would ask me what I thought. And I would sort of work through it. And then he would respond and let me know sort of what
the real answer is.
Yeah. But he wouldn't do it that way. He would just say, here's another way to think about it. And so he helped me develop my thinking. In fact, he's the one who said, if I don't go back to get a PhD, my thinking will remain fractured. I had no idea what he meant, but he was right.
Wow.
Yeah. So he pushed me. Steve pointed me towards grace. Rev helped me understand, my major in college was Greek and Hebrew. So he helped me understand the challenge of languages and God and his goofy sovereignty. I can do both languages, and who would know? So he pushed me that way. Steve pushed me towards the cross, and Wilf pushed me towards thinking things through. Yeah.
Wow.
Pretty cool, huh?
Yeah. Thanks for sharing.
Not bad.
This I'm going to go ahead and make a plug for one of our sponsors who's not really a sponsor, but Sunlight Christian Academy is currently hiring. So if you are a teacher and you've already listened to all this, and you feel like we're the type of people that we could relate to you and you would fit in with us, we'd love to start conversations there. We're always looking for great teachers. And I do want to talk to a lot of this stuff, but this is probably for another episode. There's still to uncover. So Jerry, you're going to have to come back on for future episodes. I want to know about you being a pastor, different transitions in your life. I didn't get to ask about that.
The horror stories.
Sin and self-worth. So there's a lot of stuff that we could go through in future episodes, but
bring a couch next time.
Yeah. The Dean of Deep Thoughts, Jary Reed, Mr. Multiply, Scott Vanderploeg. Thanks for being on the Disciple Standard podcast, and thanks for watching. And if you guys want to catch us anywhere, if you want to support the podcast, go to our Patreon. It's only $5. We're trying to get a camera. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.
The future is now.